94. Denison, Texas. Amos Bledsoe, get out of the street before you run someone over with that infernal contraption. It took a great deal of mental fortitude, but Amos managed not to roll his eyes at the pretty debutante holding court on the boardwalk outside the dressmaker's shop. His mama had drilled manners into him at an early age, so he chose instead to release the steering handle with one hand and doff his hat to her as he politely slowed his pace. "Miss Dexter?" He even offered a smile, though the effort did nothing to soften the indignation on the face of the lady in question. He nodded to her ever-present companions as well. "Miss Berryhill? Miss Watts?" "I declare." Harriet scrunched her nose as she waved a gloved hand in his direction. "If God had meant for mankind to ride upon two-wheeled devices, he wouldn't have created horses. Just look at you wobbling about. Anyone with half a brain knows that for a vehicle to be sturdy, it needs 4 wheels. "What about a pony cart, Harriet?" Miss Berryhill ventured, her forehead crinkling. "My Aunt Bee rides in one all the time and never has any trouble." "That's because it's attached to a pony, a creature with 4 legs," Harriet huffed. "The animal keeps the cart steady." Amos had to admit she'd been quick with that rejoinder. As much as he disliked her for so actively disliking him, he couldn't discount her intelligence. He just wished she'd use it for something other than belittling him in public. It seemed her favorite pastime. "Bicycles are quite safe, I assure you," Amos countered, determined to continue on the path of higher ground. "Even young women ride them. They're quite the rage back east. Haven't you seen the pictures in Harper's Bazaar?" All right, so perhaps he'd hit a divot in his higher ground travels. He couldn't resist prodding her a little. "My sister said a bicycle costume from Paris was featured on Harper's cover back in April." He nodded toward the dressmaker's shop. "I'm sure if you haven't seen it, Mrs. Ludlow could let you peruse her copy." He'd never thought it would come in handy to have a sister dedicated to keeping up with the latest fashion trends, but seeing Harriet Dexter flounder for a reply suddenly made all the dull evening spent in Mother's parlor listening to female dither about fabric and patterns well worth the torture. "Really, Amos," Harriet sputtered, "how vulgar you are to speak of split skirts and bloomers in mixed company. Why, I'm appalled, simply appalled." She sniffed and immediately set off down the boardwalk in the opposite direction. "Come, girls, I see a gentleman more worthy of our time. Oh, Roy!" She waved, and a cowboy standing outside Yidle's beer hall touched the brim of his hat, right before spitting a juicy wad of tobacco over the railing to mix with the mud of the street. Definitely a fine specimen of gentlemanhood. How could Amos possibly hope to compete? Taking refuge in mental sarcasm usually removed the worst of rejection's sting, but a prick or two remained. It always did, even after years of practice. Amos shrugged and remounted his bicycle. He pedaled with more vigor than usual, eager to increase the distance between himself and his latest female failure. Today's episode shouldn't bother him. After all, it wasn't as if he wanted Harriet Dexter's attention. The woman was a shrew of the first order. It was a matter of pride, he supposed. No one liked to be perceived as lacking, or constantly passed over in favor of a version of manhood he'd never achieve. A block past Maine and Austin, traffic lessened considerably. Shops gave way to schools, churches, and finally dwellings. Lucy's home was another 3 blocks down on Morton Street, which gave him far too much time to ponder the vagaries of the feminine mind before dinner. If these were still prehistoric times, when the breadth of a man's shoulders directly corresponded to one's likelihood of survival, he could understand a woman preferring a cowpuncher like Roy Edmondson over him, despite the man's tobacco habit and bent toward liquor. But this was the modern age, a time